Where I really think we're missing the boat right now is that presentation. Think about nuclear. Nuclear is incredibly safe. The vertical takeoff and landing is perfect for them because they don't have the large runways. Is there some way to utilize those? I think would be a head start.
But somebody have to make those mistakes, and I think
Yeah.
the Arabs have enough money to waste.
Yeah.
And hey, welcome to the Air Mobility Show. I am Ahmad Malik with my co-host Nadia. Today we're having a coffee session with a friend of ours, Phil. Phil is an engineer. He's a techie guy. He's a technologist and an AAM enthusiast. And we wanted to just have a general conversation on the industry and technology. So, welcome, Phil.
Hey, thank you. Good to see you, Nadia. My name is Phil Marzoff. As Matt said, I'm a engineer by education, but I've drifted into more in the commercialization phase of bringing innovative ideas into the marketplace. My background was in integrated circuits many years ago. I was in Germany working in private equity for a few years. Since I came back to the United States, my interests have morphed towards AI digital twins. But I also do, would say, advocacy in the area of advanced aerial mobility and quantum mechanics, which I think are very interesting to juxtapose because um, I think one, the technology is waiting to happen, and in the other, the technology is there and the market's waiting to happen. So I find that as a interesting comparison between the two. Looking forward to the discussion this morning.
Fantastic. Let's start with just a general conversation around AAM and how did you fell into advanced air mobility?
Yeah, it's actually fortuitous. This came about through Arizona State University. So I'm based here in Phoenix, which is
Mhm.
actually one of the prime locations that could support AAM as a launching pad. So I was working at Arizona State University, mentoring a team of graduate students who were sponsored by a project from Honeywell looking into AAM. And that's actually how I got introduced to it. That's how I met Ahmad. And, I always had thought that was a futuristic thing, but the value proposition is certainly there for a certain class of transportation. The question for me was always, why not just use a helicopter, right? And then learning that these EVTOLs especially offer a lot of significant advantages over helicopters and can really take us to the next level of interurban transportation. And that's actually the area I'm more excited about is when we can get through a city or close city hops very efficiently. I think that decade or two um, time frame is the most exciting for me.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned quite a few relevant things earlier, like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, AI, in terms of the technology that will be required to make this happen. And digital twins is one of the things for I think navigation and CNS and also managing the traffic management capabilities
Yeah.
that will be required. We know there are certain difficulties, if you may, in the technology that exists right now. I think eventually artificial intelligence will be the driving force behind management and behind
Hmm.
autonomy and so on. And so many of these devices, vehicles will be perforating the area. You will need something like quantum compute to run those millions and millions of computes, right? So I think all of your background is very relevant, and it's just going to be a amazing added value.
Yeah. It's exciting to see how this unfolds. What reminds me, I think, is it Douglas Hofstadter who had made that comment that AI is what doesn't work, and once AI works, it's just software. So well, I think what makes the future so hard to predict is just the fact that once something works, we take it for granted, right? And
That's true. That's true. I mean, even look at the models right now. No one really knows how they exactly work. To be honest, I mean, we
yeah,
don't know once the transformation has happened, the transformers, how they do it. Even the ones
Yeah,
who built it don't know. So it's an unpredictable world. What's happening. So it would be
you
exciting
know.
to see how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, so given that, I'm very much an advocate of an agile like mindset to this. Of let's get to the. I always like to say, right? Nobody has ever sprinted up Mount Everest, right? You go through cutbacks, you have base camps. So I always like to think of these ventures of what does it take to get to the next base camp.
Hmm.
Um, and we've spoken before outside of this, and I think clearly the Gulf is going to be that first base camp, Gulf of the GCC. For people who are outside the U.S., what's really interesting about our country is we have a very decentralized government, which means we have a lot of municipalities and towns that have their own rules, and that makes flying over airspace in different cities a headache. So, for example, just out to the west here in Phoenix, there's a town called Tolleson, and Amazon is starting to do drone deliveries, air
Yeah.
drone deliveries in that city. And because of regulations, they can't go outside that city limit. So
Yeah.
here I'm in Phoenix proper. If I ordered something from the Tolleson distribution plant, I can't get it air drone because it can only go to the border of Tolleson. So the U.S. is going to be a slow starter in this, but I think once we start seeing deployment outside and seeing what value it could bring, we could catch up quickly.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think one of the biggest challenges we have is we create this air of safety being a big problem, especially in
Yeah,
aviation. And the traditionalists of the aviation who've been doing this for many years are so confident that they know exactly what this is. And the reality is, in my view, this AAM whole branch of aviation is completely different from your traditional aviation.
I would agree with that because I'm not a pilot. I'm not an aeronautics engineer. So from the technical side of propulsion, the extent of my knowledge is I know propulsion drives everything. That's I picked up that thing, but I couldn't offer anything there. But there's striking similarities for me with SpaceX, just in the incumbents imposed on themselves these fictitious constraints that just made it expensive and slow. And then you have an outsider who comes in and challenges those, and you find out a lot of those were paper tigers, and they fell. And he launching at a fraction of the cost at 10 times the speed is capable. So I think we will have that reckoning. Um, so, being a commercialization person and trying to get stuff into market, the way I've been thinking about this, and I'll be curious to get your perspective, right, is what's the incentive, right? So, as the things I picked up from economics, you take all the equations away. For me, the big one is it's incentive based, right? There needs to be an incentive to get this going, and where you mentioned two things that, well, at least you mentioned one of the two things that I think get in the way. One is the incumbent uh, belief in trying to make this difficult, which is scaring people away. And the other, which I hear a lot, is this discussion about the cost being cost prohibitive, being for the elites, and so on, which I also find ridiculous. But for me, on the AAM side, there are EVTOLs that could get the job done today, right? In that next base camp, um, but you don't want to be putting up barriers to the public of making this sound either hard or expensive or elite. And for me, that's part of the thing I think that needs to be attacked as much as the technological challenges.
Yeah, I think so. One of the biggest drivers initially was sustainable sustainability and renewable energy sources, and that is the electrification is the paving the path for that. So that's, I think, the initial driver was. But then they also realized that creating electric propulsion and batteries and so on, it also simplifies the technology that is used to build these vehicles, and that's a huge advantage because you can reduce the cost of manufacturing, you can reduce the cost of operations, and the operational requirements for safety and so on, because now you don't have an engine that have thousands and thousands of parts
Yeah.
working, and any one of them can go bad and you're buggered. Essentially what you have is one motor connected to a battery and then some other controllers, etc. But it's, with all that complication, still not hardly as complicated as your traditional combustion engines are, and the whole technology around it. The cost is a big factor. I think you can have multiple vehicles for the cost of one.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have never ridden in a helicopter, and I'll tell you why. When I was a junior in undergrad, we had a control system class, and we had to model certain systems. So we had to, model airplanes, and then we had to model a helicopter. And that control system was a devil to control, and we always crashed in the simulation. So I've been terrified of helicopters ever since. But now with an eVTOL and fly-by-wire, the Arizona Commerce Authority had put on a advanced air mobility show a couple of weeks ago, and I forget the gentleman who said it, but he was a trained helicopter pilot from the Navy or the Air Force, and he said, he has to psych himself every time he's going into a helicopter because he's got to get all these things right. And he said, I go into these eVTOLs, and he goes, I would have to really try and hurt myself
Yeah.
because the fly by wire is so good. Um, so
Yeah.
I think the safety is going to be there. That's an aspect that's not played up enough in my view. I mean, getting to the safety. Um, and the second is I just completely reject this expensive argument. I mean, to the point that you made, the economics work a lot better. But also, um, I was trying to think about this. I don't know of anything that we've adopted in the last few years that didn't start with being um, used by a select few and then within a few years trickling down to everybody. And I mean, I'm going back to uh, refrigerators that defrosted themselves. Right? I'm going back to the 70s, just thinking through this. Um, Power steering and power brakes on cars,
Yeah.
um, air conditioning in
Yeah.
homes, DVD players, flat screen TVs. Right there's a period where you walk into somebody's house and they have it, and you're like, oh, they're doing well, and now you expect it when it comes in. So that is just a natural part of the evolution of technology, right? You're going to have to get to these select people who can pay a little more as you work out the technology, as you get scale and you bring down the marginal cost. But then within a few years, it's commonplace. So that's another aspect I think that needs to be appreciated
I
more.
mean, and I think it will happen more quickly because you have a lot of startups. I mean, if you look at just the
Yeah,
a taxi world, you have Joby, you have Archer, you have Risk. There's a lot of companies out there. They're already going towards the certification stage right now. The technology, to a certain extent, is already there, usable to
yeah,
a certain extent. Yes, it's not to the level that we want to, perhaps, but it
yeah.
will get there.
I think this gets back to your point of the danger of an incumbent bias.
Yeah.
Um, Coming back a little bit, are you familiar with Clayton Christensen? The late
No.
Clayton Christensen. He was a extremely good business professor at the Harvard Business School. He's the authored a few books: The Innovator's Dilemma, The Innovator's Solution. He had this concept of disruptive innovation. His theory is, how do incumbent companies fall? It's when an upstart comes in and offers a not so good product, but it gets the job done. And the incumbent's like, oh, this is crap. That it is just like Boeing with SpaceX, right? Like, oh, these guys are jokers. They can't do this. But it works at a small segment, and the newcomer is hungry, and they keep improving, improving, improving at a fast rate. And then one day the incumbent wakes up and they're getting beat because the newcomer is just, they're lean, they're mean, and they're moving fast. And I see this dynamic playing out. Archer and Joby, they know what they have to do. They're going to move for it. I think some of the big incumbents who are stalling are going to get lapped at some point.
Yeah.
And I think a big benefit of the EVTOL is that their key component is common to a lot of problems, which is the battery. And this is actually where I see the first intercept point for AI and quantum is actually in battery technology. And what excites me about that is it's not eVTOL specific. It's, if you're in that application space, this is a society wide, worldwide need. So a lot of effort. There's the incentive there to really figure out how to crack. I mean, for as long as I can remember, there's been a battery breakthrough that never happened. I mean, over the last 20, 30 years, and tons of money are going in there. So there is a lot of money willing to go to getting batteries. Batteries, Arieka, the last company I was with, was a materials company. Materials are hard, man. I mean, they're figuring this out. So bringing AI in, and I honestly think there's a quantum component to chemistry design that's going to be really important here. So I think that's something going very strong for the industry, is that there's other societal demands that will benefit tangentially or matter of factly from a breakthrough there.
I wanted to touch upon the infrastructure requirements and
Yes.
obviously where we stand where with the vertiports and the incentives behind building the vertiports. Who will be building those vertiports? Is it the local government, the municipality, or the private sector? What would be the driver for them, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think that's a golden question, because as Ahmad had said, the vehicles themselves aren't going to be a capital hindrance. Um, the vertiport may actually be where we see the pain point economically. I'm not deep into all the happenings in vertiports, like what their cost would be, how many flights they need to get money back. Are they going to be fortuitously situated on top of buildings or existing structures, or are they going to become like train stations were in Europe, right? A center of activity for the community. I think that could be a really big determinant about how well these take off. I know Clint Harper is a big advocate of utilizing underutilized airports. It blew me away. I had no idea how many airports we have in the U.S. There were thousands, right?
Over
I thought
5,000,
there would
isn't
be
it?
hundreds, but we have thousands of municipal airports that are not fully utilized, and the vertical takeoff and landing is perfect for them because they don't have the large runways. Is there some way to utilize those? I think would be a head start.
So even though, yes, the governments are probably not interested in investing into it, but they will have to, because these can't be run by private individuals and organizations. There have to be some sort of a central um, management of sorts that have to work. UAMM, the Unified Air Mobility Management,
Mm,
um, started from that very idea that we're looking at a very specific focus, and this is where I think the GCC countries are ahead of everyone else, because if you look at what they have done in Dubai, they've announced a contract where Joby will be will be providing the services within Dubai, but they are building vertiports. They're bringing some other contractors to come in, and they're integrating it into the city, and the government is actually financing that. So if the governments can redirect that investment into projects
yeah.
like that, real infrastructure projects, then I think that will make a big difference.
Curious, in the Gulf, what is the vision of the vertiport? Is it like the European train station where it's the center of activity? Is it tangential to main activity? How are they viewing that?
Honestly, still really an evolving situation right now.
Hmm.
I know the idea is to connect certain parts of the city to a central location. So for
Hmm.
now, the plan is to connect the airports to major hubs. Like we have Dubai downtown, we have Business Bay,
Hmm.
Dubai Marina is a very popular destination. So from there to the airport, and I think they
Hmm.
will operate more like taxi stands, if you may,
Okay.
with a parking capability, charging capability, and then
Hmm.
something like that. So that's the idea so far. I don't think they have worked everything out yet. And that's
Hmm.
absolutely fine because they will learn from what they build now and they will make some mistakes and improve and so on. But somebody have to make those mistakes. And I think,
Yeah.
the Arabs have enough money to waste.
Yeah.
And, they want this. They really, really want it. They want to be the first.
So, just to look at different parts of the world and obviously different markets, Europe is a very established, continent, and there is very little space to build
Yeah.
something new, something bigger. Renovation is expensive. Land is expensive. In the U.S., there is a lot of land there where development is possible. And UAE, there will be more people moving into Dubai. It will be expanding. So depending on the countries or continents, how do you see the developments of infrastructure will be built differently, and
Oh, absolutely.
therefore the pricing, and the type of fleet that will be operated. Like in Europe, probably I would see it personally as bus service. You just hop on from one place to another, and it's efficient, and it's relatively cheap. Probably in Dubai it will be more high value for tourism. So how would it impact, the planning of and the pricing of all of the
Yeah.
things?
That gets us to the real point here, as far as incentives and what's going to make this go. I'm not sold on the bus analogy yet.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think I think that is decades away before we get to that hop on hop off type thing. Personally, what I'm worried about is this experience value of AAM. Tori Drummond runs a very successful company out here in Arizona, and she'll talk right away that from her perspective, we should get her on the show. Her company, and I'm forgetting the name of it right off the top of my head, but they just put in a big order with Archer for EVTOLs. Yeah, yeah, and I think she could justify it just on the tourist value of. I mean, in Arizona, we have a lot of hot air balloon rides. You could give a VTOL and see the spans. You can get up to the canyon and a lot of great things. Uh, One, I think that falls way short of a urban uh, step change in urban mobility. Two, I don't think that is sustainable for the rest of the ecosystem, right? So I do think you have a situation where an individual operator could make money on these, but Joby and Archer and all, they need to get a heck of a lot of planes out there, right? I don't think they can support their business model just on the experience side of it. I think that's too niche for what they have in mind. So my thoughts really go to getting this into a viable alternative for interurban mobility, right? I think Joby, if you go to their website, they have an excellent example of this. In New York City, where I'm from, if you fly into JFK and you want to get to downtown Manhattan, um, you have to go by car there. It is probably a painstaking 45 minutes to an hour. And you're driving with New Yorkers, and you're on the Belt Parkway, which is got to be one of the worst roads in the United States. But you can have a straight shot from JFK over the Narrows to downtown Manhattan. You get a free flyby of the Statue of Liberty on that, which would probably be awesome, and you could do that in like 10 minutes, right? And that's viable. A lot of urban centers, I think, have very good business travel cases that will get things started. And then I think that gives a broad enough base that the scale can come that will reduce the cost, that could get that more in touch with the general local person to be able to use that for different tasks. I lived in Europe for 3.5 years. They'll regulate the crap out of this before they get a plane in the air. I'm just maybe they'll learn their lesson right now with what's going on, but at current trajectory, people will be buzzing around the planet before they get anything in the air. I think,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean there there is some news out about the city starting to do something about it. We're talking a lot about the passenger traffic, and yeah, that is,
Yeah,
I think, the most difficult from a safety perspective.
Mhm.
But one of the most important use cases will be logistics, right? And not only just the deliveries like Amazon does, but also larger van size delivery and trucks, many small truck size delivery vehicles that have been developed right now. I think that is going to be another big use case and have a huge impact economically and socially as well.
yeah. No, that's for me. That's an interesting point because you have the competition for the air routes. Would you see these logistics using the same vertiports, or would it be kind of central hub to distribution center type stuff? I mean, I'm curious to see how that plays out.
I mean, I don't know exactly how it will materialize, but I
Yeah.
can give you one example. So we have a startup here in Spain, in Barcelona, and a friend of mine, he is building a vehicle that can fly and also can drive, and it's like a minivan, and they have a small container type thing that can be
Okay.
plugged into it. So basically, the vehicle is an eVTOL, so we'll take over vertically and we'll go from one place to another and then fold the wings and can do the last mile on the road if it needs to. It can drive
All
and
right.
it's going to be autonomous. But his model is that this is going to be used by logistics companies. So it will be flying from one logistics center to another, and it will be operating in that way. Um, but I don't think that is the only operational
Yeah.
model here. Yeah, you
Mhm.
have to eventually be more flexible. You can't be like, okay, like Amazon have these vans and they just use it and no one else does. Eventually, it
Yeah.
will be just like our logistics now. It will start sharing. You will be able to go different places. I don't think that you can use the same vertiports that passengers can
Yeah.
use for delivering
Yeah.
uh,
That would be my
buses
fear.
or delivery vans, right? But if the last mile delivery have to be from a delivery station, then it could be that they have to build their own vertiport that is
Yeah.
designed for the delivery infrastructure.
I have confidence that the logistic companies and logistic people will nail this, right? Because they live and breed optimization. So they could, they'll figure out when to fly, when to drive, when to walk. I mean, they're between Amazon stuff, the Orion system for UPS here in the states, just able to squeeze out miles driven and everything. So they'll figure out how to do it. What my not my concern, but from a personal transport concern would be: do those advancements bring down the marginal cost for individual transport?
Mhm.
And if which I have a concern about is if vertiports become the economic roadblock, right? Like making a vertiport fiscally sustainable, and the logistics don't need those vertiports, right? Then logistics taking off doesn't help personal transport, right? Unlike batteries, that if the grid figures out a new battery chemistry, the entire world will benefit and raise all ships. Um, I just keep an eye out on the fact that one sector can flourish and not necessarily be a boost for other sectors. And I think in logistics, there's that danger. To the point of standardization and regulation, there's a lot to be learned from open source. When I first heard open source come out back like 90s, early 2000s, I thought it was the dumbest idea I'd ever heard. Like, why would you ever give away something for free that you spent, right? I mean, I grew up in the IC industry, which was proprietary. Um, but you look what the open source has created. It's been a phenomenal success, and the reason we're able to do this today is because we have TCP/IP. protocols, right? So all you have to do is figure out how to interface to the TCP layer or the IP layer, and above and below, you make stuff happen. So a very sensible way to constrain things in a way that liberates content providers. And that was all done open source. I would like to see that strategy emerge for AAM. So instead of the government bodies going off and telling us what to do, really having these experts in a very open source dialogue. And it's messy. It could be intimidating at times, but it has shown itself in ways to it's shown
Mhm.
itself to converge in ways that have impacted the world. Right? I mean, think think about a government trying to design the internet. Oh my God. Oh my God, we'd
Yeah.
never have three countries on one phone call at the same time, right? So that I think I'm very seriously think that has to be broken, and let this go open source. And the nice thing about open source is it's shown to be very robust to rejecting monopolistic implementations, right? Sometimes it's susceptible to that, but it has done a very good job in ways that have impacted the world that
Yeah.
have been enabling.
Yeah, I think the biggest achievement of open source is rejecting politicizing
Yeah,
of any standards, right? Because that's one of the biggest problem. If you leave it to countries and politicians, they will politicize the shit out of it, right?
yeah,
I mean, it's you spend so much time and money wasted in trying to push something that's just not going to work because you know there is some political agenda behind it. And I think IEEE type of organization to help standardize the AM kind of things is absolutely vital in this landscape. And honestly, this is why you remember we talked about this earlier that I want to take that UAM paper, which is kind of a becoming a 360-degree framework.
hmm
And obviously, first of all, I've developed it by myself so far, and I'm running out of my capacity
yeah.
to deal with all the other standards that's outside of my skill set. And also, I think that needs to be open source, and maybe that people can take and just build upon that, and an organization set up around that can really help the entire industry.
I think that's the direction it has to go. Otherwise, we have such a great opportunity because things aren't established yet.
Yeah, greenfield. There is a human propensity to mess this up properly.
Yeah,
and, and
yeah,
I think between the politicians and between the decision makers who really not clued up and don't really understand the technology or don't really understand the impact of the decisions they will make, they can really mess it up, royally mess it up.
talking about base camps and inflection points, where do you see as the next big critical inflection point for the industry?
I mean, I think we haven't even reached the first point, uh, honestly, because unless there is some form of actual service out there, um, actually, no, that's not really true because um, there are places where service is out there, even though it's not part of the Western world, so you never see it. Um, and until that sort of crosses that border, we will not really see it, to be honest. So if you look at EHang as an example, that's a company, China-based company, but they are certified to fly in China, and there are commercial operations in China right now, and that is an autonomous vehicle, right?
Hmm.
Um, I heard recently that they also started passenger flights in Thailand.
Oh,
But the thing is, until the rest of the world start seeing that, we will not even get to a point where we can see the next step. Because the other issue we have is that if there is one problem, one accident, or
yeah,
one setback, that will set back the entire progress
yeah,
a few years. Same thing
yeah,
happened like the autonomous cars and also with the battery technology. Remember early days, one or two caught fire. It was so much in the news. Now everyone think, every single car will catch fire, which is not
yeah.
true. I mean, how
Right.
many Teslas you've seen catching fire?
So perception is reality, right? But I always say that that's only half of the saying, right? So for me, that saying is perception is reality, but perception is influenced by presentation.
Yeah.
And where I really think we're missing the boat right now is that presentation side. Think about nuclear, right? Nuclear is incredibly safe. Chernobyl was the commies doing some weird stuff there, right? So you take that out. We had an incident in the United States in Pennsylvania in the 70s. Something went wrong. The safeguards that were in place stopped it from being a catastrophe, right? So the system worked. That 3 Mile Island has inhibited the nuclear growth in the US. All goes back to the messaging, right? To me, that's not a technology problem, right? That was a messaging problem failure back in 1970s US that rippled through. So I think to your point, I'm terrified of that, right? One
Yeah.
big issue could throw us back, and again, I don't see the advocacy in the industry really just beating that to the punch and getting in front of that story.
There is some advocacy there, because what I hear so far from the
Hmm.
industry and from the advocates of advanced air mobility, they understand
Hmm.
the problem of messaging, they understand the problems of acceptance, but it is not in the masses yet. I think the message need to be out. And honestly, this is why we started the podcast. This channel is purely so that we can educate people, have this conversation, and spread the word.
Yeah, no,
And and that is needed.
that's the venue that I think is missing, right? Is it doesn't matter if the experts feel good about this, right? I mean, nuclear experts are fine with 3 Mile Island, right? From my standpoint, I think in the U.S. the big make or break is going to be Los Angeles 2028. I know Archer is planning a showcase. I think this is an ideal venue for it, right? So the Olympics will be in Los Angeles in 2028. Los Angeles is sprawling, so the venues will be separated by a reachable distance. And if you've ever been in LA, traffic is just horrendous. So the value, the attention would be on it. So for me in the U.S., I think we have to be ready for prime time and really have 2028 should really make this look like a great experience. The savings, um, demonstrating how quiet these things are, how effortlessly they fly in the air. I think that would be great. So I'm like working back from that time point of what needs to be in place for 2028 to really put this on the map.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point. Not only the LA, but also Brisbane. There's also an Olympics event happening in Brisbane, and they are also committed for to operate, and already signed contracts with likes of Whisk and so on, and they are very very highly committed as well.
My concern is that's 3.5 years, right? So Joby's got a good war chest now, but the cost of running Joby and Arsha are not insignificant, right? So even if you have $1 billion in the bank, that's a few years of runway, and it looks like a tight race.
Thank you so much for joining this episode. And normally, to finish up, we just go over the three main points that our listener would take away from this episode.
We covered a lot of ground, which was great. I would say the one um, summary point that probably I feel is most underrated is the need for open source collaboration over regulation. If we want this to be adopted by all people throughout the world, we really need to rely on that open source collaboration that the industry can provide.
I think for me, one of the key elements to take away was the vertiport infrastructure, the financing, and the government support, and the private money coming into funding the initiatives for and depending on the region where the vertiport infrastructure will be built. So, and Ahmad, what do you think? What would be the third point?
Yeah, I think we covered a lot of ground, and all these topics are absolutely fantastic. I think what we understand, and we keep coming to that conclusion that technology is really getting there. We really can start. So there are these some underrated topics like Phil mentioned, and the collaboration that is needed and bringing everything together. If we can make that happen, I think this is is a very fantastic time to be alive, to be honest. I'm very, very excited for what it holds for us in the future. And once again, Phil, thank you very much for joining. I think we will be doing it more often. You're one of the friends of the channel, as we say. And thank you very much for everyone tuning in. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next episode.
All right. Thank you very much.